I need to create a new outline for a story based on the title and thumbnail provided. Let me first craft a detailed outline for this story. Now, I'll write the complete 500-word story based on this outline. I'm Katherine, 62 years old, and I never expected to be abandoned on a dirt road at my age. My husband Harold died unexpectedly last month after 40 years of marriage. Our son Trevor handled everything. The funeral arrangements, the paperwork, even drove me home afterward. Yesterday, he suggested a drive to clear our heads. 8 miles down a remote road, he stopped the car and said coldly, "This is where you get off. The house and business are mine now." Before I tell you how I went from abandoned on a dirt road to reclaiming my life, let me know where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever had to start over after betrayal. Harold and I built our construction company from nothing but hard work and determination. We met in community college, both the first in our families to pursue higher education. He was studying construction management. I was focused on business and accounting. We were married 6 months after graduation, pooling our meager savings to buy our first fixer-upper house. Harold did the renovations while I tracked expenses and found the next property. Within 5 years, we had a small but growing construction business. Those early years were tough but satisfying. We worked side by side, Harold handling the construction crews while I managed the books, client relationships, and permits. Every night we'd sit at our kitchen table going over plans, solving problems together. We were true partners in every sense of the word. Harold was the face of the company, but everyone in the industry knew I was equally involved in all major decisions. Success came gradually but steadily. By the time Trevor was born, 10 years into our marriage, we were financially comfortable. By his high school graduation, we were wealthy. Our company, Hendricks Construction, had become one of the largest commercial builders in the Northwest. Perhaps that was part of the problem. Trevor never knew struggle. While Harold and I had grown up pinching pennies, Trevor had everything handed to him. Private schools, expensive cars, lavish vacations. We thought we were giving him advantages we never had, but looking back, I see we deprived him of something essential, the satisfaction of earning his own way. When Trevor joined the company after college, Harold was thrilled to have his son following in his footsteps. I was more cautious. I'd seen Trevor's sense of entitlement grow over the years. He expected corner offices and executive titles without putting in the work. Harold indulged him, overriding my concerns. "He's young," Harold would say. "He'll learn the business in time." But Trevor wasn't interested in learning, he was interested in status. He'd attend meetings unprepared, make promises to clients without consulting anyone, and disappear for long lunches that stretched into afternoons. When I tried to address these issues, Harold accused me of being too hard on our son. 3 years ago, Harold's health began to decline. His blood pressure was dangerously high, and his doctor warned of potential heart problems. He started stepping back from daily operations, giving Trevor more responsibility. I watched with growing concern as Trevor surrounded himself with friends in management positions, people who agreed with him rather than challenging his ideas. I tried talking to Harold about it, but he dismissed my worries. "You're being overprotective, Kathy," he'd say. "Trevor has his own way of doing things. Times change." In the months before Harold's death, I found myself increasingly sidelined. Meetings happened without me. Decisions were made that I only learned about afterward. Trevor would say, "We didn't want to bother you, Mom. You and Dad should be enjoying life now." Then came that terrible morning when Harold clutched his chest at breakfast and collapsed. The paramedics couldn't revive him. Just like that, after 40 years together, my partner was gone. The days after Harold's death passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. Trevor stepped up, handling details and staying close by my side. I was grateful for his support, too, grief-stricken to notice how quickly he moved to take control of company matters. The will reading was straightforward. Harold had left everything to be shared equally between Trevor and me. As his widow, I owned 50% of Hendricks Construction. Trevor owned the other half. We would need to work together just as Harold and I always had. That's when I noticed the first real change in Trevor's behavior. Where he had been solicitous and concerned, he suddenly became businesslike and distant. He started bringing me documents to sign. "Just routine things to keep the company running smoothly, Mom." In my grief, I signed without reading carefully. A mistake I would soon deeply regret. The morning after the funeral, Trevor appeared at my door, dressed casually in jeans and a light jacket. "Let's take a drive, Mom," he suggested. "Get some fresh air. It might help clear your head." I accepted gratefully. The house felt too empty, too full of Harold's absence. The idea of getting out even briefly was appealing. I grabbed my purse, not bothering to pack anything else for what I assumed would be a short outing. Trevor was unusually quiet as we drove. When I commented on it, he shrugged. "Just thinking about the future." I didn't press. We were all adjusting to life without Harold in our own ways. It wasn't until the landscape started changing that I began feeling uneasy. The suburbs gave way to rural areas, then to increasingly remote countryside. We'd been driving for over an hour farther than we'd ever go for a casual outing. "Where are we going?" I finally asked. "There's something I need to do," Trevor replied without looking at me. The paved road turned to gravel, then to dirt. My phone lost service. Trees crowded close to the narrow road, and I realized I had no idea where we were. Fear began blooming in my chest, though I couldn't articulate why. This was my son, after all. Trevor finally stopped the car in the middle of nowhere, just dust, scrubby trees, and distant mountains. He turned off the engine, and the silence felt oppressive. "Trevor." My voice sounded small, uncertain. He turned to face me, and I didn't recognize the cold expression in his eyes. "This is where you get off, Mom." "What are you talking about?" I asked, laughing nervously. This had to be some kind of joke. "I'm talking about the fact that I'm done living in your and Dad's shadow. The company is mine now. The house is mine. Everything is mine." I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "Trevor, the will clearly stated we share everything equally. I own half the company." He smirked, an expression so unlike the boy I'd raised that it chilled me. "Not anymore. Those papers you've been signing? You've been transferring your shares to me bit by bit. It's all legal. It's all binding." The shock felt physical, like being doused with ice water. "You tricked me while I was grieving your father." "Business is business, Mom. Dad understood that. He built the company with ruthless decisions when necessary. I learned from him." "Your father would never have done something like this," I said, my voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Wouldn't he?" "You never saw what happened to his former partners. Dad told me stories you don't know. He taught me to take opportunities when they appear." Trevor reached across me and pushed open the passenger door. "This is your stop. The house and business are mine now." "You can't be serious." I couldn't believe this was happening. "We're miles from anywhere. I don't even have my phone. You have your purse. There's a small town about 8 miles that way." He nodded, vaguely down the road. "You're resourceful, Mom. You'll figure something out." "Trevor, think about what you're doing," I pleaded, grasping for anything that might reach him. "This isn't just unethical. It's cruel." "It's business," he repeated coldly. "Now get out." When I didn't move, frozen in shock, he leaned across me and physically pushed me. I stumbled out of the car, my legs barely supporting me. Before I could recover, Trevor had reached into the back seat, tossed my purse onto the dirt beside me, and slammed the door shut. I stood there, unable to comprehend what was happening as my son, the baby I'd nursed, the boy I'd raised, the man I thought I knew, drove away without looking back. His car disappeared around a bend, leaving only a cloud of dust and the sound of an engine fading into the distance. And just like that, I was alone. The full realization of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in the dust of Trevor's departure, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. My son had just abandoned me on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. I had no phone, no car, and no idea exactly where I was. My first reaction was tears. Angry, shocked tears that left tracks down my dust-covered face. I screamed Trevor's name, though I knew he couldn't hear me. I screamed until my throat was raw, until the futility of it penetrated my shock. When the dust literally settled, I forced myself to think practically. What did I have? I took inventory of my purse wallet with about $80 in cash, credit cards, ID tissues, lipstick, reading glasses, mints, and a small bottle of water. No phone. I'd left it charging at home, never expecting to need it on a short drive with my son. I looked up and down the road. Nothing but dirt and trees in both directions. The sun was high overhead, around noon, I guessed, which gave me several hours before darkness. Trevor had mentioned a town 8 miles away, but I had no way of knowing if he was telling the truth or which direction it might be. I chose to walk in the direction Trevor had indicated, if only because it seemed marginally less isolated than the way we had come. My shoes, sensible flats I'd worn to the funeral the day before, weren't made for hiking, and my black dress pants and light sweater weren't appropriate for the cool mountain air. Every step was a struggle against disbelief. How could the child I'd raised do this to me? Was there something I'd missed? Some sign I should have seen? The questions circled endlessly as my feet carried me forward mechanically. The road seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, winding through trees with no sign of civilization. My water was gone within the first hour. My feet developed blisters that burst painfully with each step, but I kept walking because stopping meant accepting defeat. As I walked, memories surfaced. Not of Trevor, but of my own childhood. Growing up poor in rural Oregon, walking miles to school because we couldn't afford the bus fee. My father leaving when I was 12, my mother working double shifts to keep food on the table. I'd learned early that life wasn't fair, that you had to be strong to survive. Somewhere along the way, in the comfort of my success with Harold, I'd forgotten those lessons. The sun was setting when I spotted a small structure through the trees. An old hunting cabin, weathered and clearly abandoned for some time. Its windows were broken, the door hanging askew on rusted hinges, but it was shelter, and my legs were giving out. Breaking in required only a firm push against the damaged door. Inside was dusty but dry. A single room with a rusty wood stove, a broken chair, and a platform that might once have been a bed. No electricity, no running water, but a roof and walls. That first night was the longest of my life. Every creak and rustle outside sent my heart racing. I huddled in a corner using my purse as a pillow, too cold and frightened to sleep more than minutes at a time. I cycled through emotions, shock, grief, fear, and finally, as dawn lightened the cabin's interior, a slow-burning anger that felt almost like power. I stood and walked to the broken window, watching the sunrise paint the trees gold. A strange thought occurred to me then. One that would become my mantra in the weeks ahead. I'm not just alone. I'm free. Free from obligations, free from pretending Trevor was the son I thought he was, free to reinvent myself without constraints. It was a terrifying freedom, but freedom nonetheless. Whatever happened next would be entirely up to me. As the new day dawned, I made a vow to myself I would not only survive this betrayal, I would overcome it. My first priority was finding help. With renewed determination, I left the cabin at daybreak and continued down the dirt road. The morning was cool, but promised heat later. I moved more carefully now, protecting my blistered feet as best I could. After about an hour of walking, the road curved sharply and I spotted what looked like a driveway branching off to the right. Following it, I came upon a small, well-maintained cabin with a battered pickup truck parked outside. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. I approached, cautiously aware of how I must look, disheveled, dirty, and desperate. Before I could knock, the door opened and an elderly man with a shotgun appeared on the porch. "That's far enough," he called, not raising the gun but keeping it visible. "State your business." "Please," I said, my voice cracking from thirst and exhaustion. "I need help. My son left me stranded on the road yesterday. I don't know where I am." The man studied me for a long moment, suspicion gradually giving way to concern. "You been out all night?" I nodded, swaying slightly on my feet. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading. "Lord Almighty," he muttered, lowering the shotgun. "Come on in before you fall down." His name was Jackson Moore, 78 years old and living alone since his wife died 5 years earlier. He'd retired to these mountains after selling his auto repair business in Seattle. His cabin was simple but comfortable, running water from a well, electricity from solar panels, and a satellite phone for emergencies. "Nearest town is Pinecrest, about 20 miles south," he told me, as I gratefully drank the water he provided. "Not much there. Gas station, small grocery, post office. Real civilization is another 30 miles beyond that." "My son told me there was a town 8 miles away," I said. Jackson shook his head. "Not unless he meant my place. Lying seems to be the least of his crimes." When I'd recovered enough to speak coherently, I explained my situation. Jackson listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. "You're welcome to use my phone," he said when I'd finished. "Who do you want to call first?" I realized I didn't have many options. Most of our friends were business associates who would be reluctant to get involved in what appeared to be a family dispute. My parents were long dead, and I had no siblings. "Sarah Donovan," I finally said. "She's a lawyer and an old friend." Sarah answered on the third ring. Her shock at my story quickly turned to professional concern. "Katherine, I need you to check something," she said after I'd explained. "Do you have access to your bank accounts? Use Jackson's computer if he has one." Jackson did have a computer with satellite internet. Slow but functional. With Sarah on speakerphone, I logged into my personal bank account. The balance showed 0. The joint account with Harold, 0. My credit cards had all been canceled. "He's moved fast," Sarah said grimly. "Those papers you signed likely included more than share transfers. I need you to come back to the city as soon as possible so we can start legal proceedings." "That's the problem," I said. "I'm stranded 50 miles from town with no car and no money." "I'll come get you," Sarah offered immediately. "It's a 4-hour drive each way," Jackson interjected, "and the road to my place isn't great for city cars. Tell you what, she can stay here while you start the legal work. I'll drive her in when you've got something concrete." Sarah hesitated, but agreed when I assured her I'd be safe with Jackson. Before hanging up, she promised to call back the next day with a better understanding of my legal position. After the call, Jackson insisted I rest. He showed me to a small guest room, his daughter's when she visited, and left me to sleep. I woke hours later to the smell of cooking and the realization that I hadn't eaten in over 24 hours. Over a simple but delicious dinner of venison stew, Jackson shared more about himself. He'd been in business with his brother decades ago, only to be pushed out in a hostile takeover. "Lost everything," he said matter-of-factly. "My house, my savings, nearly my marriage. Took me years to rebuild." "How did you do it?" I asked. "One day at a time. Found what I was good at, worked hard, learned who I could trust." He studied me across the table. "You've got that same look I had back then. Like you've been gut-punched, but you're still standing." "I don't know if I am standing," I admitted. "Everything I had is gone." "Everything you had," Jackson corrected. "Not everything you are. Those papers your son tricked you into signing, they took your possessions, not your knowledge or your skills." His words stayed with me that night as I lay in the unfamiliar bed. I'd helped build Hendricks Construction from nothing. I knew every aspect of the business, the clients, the suppliers, the financials, the weaknesses that only an insider would recognize. That knowledge was still mine. For the first time since Trevor drove away, I felt something like hope. Sarah called the next morning with grim news. The documents I'd signed were comprehensive, transferring not only my company shares, but also giving Trevor power of attorney, allowing him to empty bank accounts and sell properties. He'd moved with surprising speed and thoroughness. "It's not hopeless," Sarah assured me, "but it will be a legal battle. I've started the process of challenging the transfers on grounds of fraud and undue influence. But it will take time." "Time I don't have," I pointed out. "I have no resources, Sarah, no income, no home." "You have friends," she replied firmly. "I've spoken to Janet Miller." Janet was a client whose commercial property we had developed 5 years earlier. She and I had become friends during the project. "She owns that small apartment complex in Westridge," Sarah continued. "She has a vacant studio unit you can use temporarily, and I can advance you some money until we sort this out." "I can't ask you to do that," I protested. "You didn't ask. I offered. That's what friends do." Her generosity brought tears to my eyes, but as I considered the offer, an idea began forming, one that would require me to stay right where I was, at least for a while. "Tell Janet I appreciate the offer, but I think I might stay here with Jackson a bit longer," I said. "There's something I need to do first." After explaining my thinking to Sarah, we agreed on a plan. She would begin legal proceedings, but delay any direct confrontation with Trevor. Meanwhile, I would work from Jackson's cabin, gathering information and developing our strategy. Jackson readily agreed to let me stay when I explained the situation. "Been a while since I had company," he said with a shrug. "Besides, I like the idea of helping you outsmart that boy of yours." Over the next few days, a strange new routine developed. During the mornings, I used Jackson's computer to dig into the company's publicly available information. Sarah had provided me with her law firm's VPN access to avoid leaving digital footprints Trevor might trace. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears. Trevor was systematically dismantling the careful business practices Harold and I had built over decades. He'd fired key longtime employees, rushed into risky contracts, and taken on debt to finance an unnecessarily lavish new headquarters building. In the afternoons, Jackson taught me practical skills I'd never needed before: chopping wood, identifying edible plants, basic auto mechanics. Self-reliance is power, he'd say. Each thing you can do for yourself is one less way someone else can control you. The physical work was exhausting but surprisingly satisfying. Each night, I fell into bed with aching muscles but a clearer mind than I'd had in years. 2 weeks after my abandonment, Sarah called with a significant discovery. "There's an account Harold set up 5 years ago that Trevor doesn't know about," she said. "It's in your name only with a substantial balance." "Why wouldn't Harold tell me about it?" I wondered. "The account notes say, insurance policy," Sarah replied. "I think Harold may have had concerns about Trevor's trustworthiness even then. The account contained enough money to fund our legal battle and provide me with living expenses. But more importantly, it confirmed that Harold had seen warning signs I'd missed. My husband had prepared a safety net without telling me, perhaps knowing I would defend Trevor against any accusations. That night, I sat with Jackson on his porch, watching the sunset and considering this new information. "Harold knew," I said softly. "He knew our son couldn't be trusted, and he tried to protect me in his own way." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes we see clearest what we're not emotionally attached to. Your husband might have been blind to some of your son's faults, but not all of them." "I keep wondering where we went wrong with Trevor," I admitted. "How did we raise someone capable of abandoning his mother on a deserted road?" "Some people are just broken inside," Jackson said after a long pause. "You can give them every advantage, every opportunity, and they'll still choose self-interest over decency. Not your fault, just is." His words offered a strange comfort. Perhaps Trevor's betrayal wasn't a reflection of my failure as a mother, but his failure as a human being. The next morning, I began making calls from Jackson's satellite phone, not to Trevor or company headquarters, but to clients and suppliers I'd worked with for years. I didn't reveal my location or situation, merely checking in as if nothing had changed. The information I gathered was invaluable. Trevor had alienated major clients with his arrogance. Supply chains were disrupted because he'd delayed payments to boost short-term cash flow. Employees were leaving in droves, taking institutional knowledge with them. In short, Trevor was running the company into the ground, and he didn't even realize it. 6 months after my abandonment, Sarah and I decided it was time to make our move. The legal groundwork was laid. The evidence of fraud was substantial. And most importantly, the company Trevor had stolen was teetering on the brink of collapse, creating the perfect opportunity for me to step in. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked during our final planning call. "You'll be facing the son who left you for dead." I looked around Jackson's cabin, which had become a strange sort of home. I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago, dependent, trusting, defined by my roles as wife and mother, and the woman I'd become resilient, self-reliant, clear-eyed about human nature. "I'm more than ready," I answered. "It's time." The Hendricks Construction quarterly board meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in the new headquarters building Trevor had commissioned. Sarah arranged for me to have security clearance and building access, though Trevor had officially removed me from all company systems. I chose my appearance carefully, not the conservative business suits I'd worn for decades, but a modern, confident look that reflected my transformation. As Jackson drove me into the city the day before, he gave me a small carved wooden charm. "Mountain ash," he explained. "Tradition says it protects against betrayal. Figured you could use all the help you can get." The board meeting was set for 9:00 a.m. I arrived at 8:45, entering through a side door to avoid early detection. Sarah met me in the hallway outside the boardroom, a portfolio of documents under her arm. "Everyone's here except Trevor," she whispered. "He's running late. Apparently there's a crisis with the Westlake project. I nodded, unsurprised. The Westlake development was their largest current project, and I'd learned from supplier contacts that critical materials had been delayed due to non-payment. At 9:10, Trevor rushed into the boardroom looking harried and impatient. He didn't see me waiting in the adjacent hallway out of sight, but able to hear the proceedings. "Let's make this quick," he announced to the board. "We have some challenges with Westlake, but everything's under control." "Is it?" I asked, stepping into the doorway. The room fell silent. Trevor froze his face, draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, he had. The woman he'd abandoned to die was very much alive and standing before him. "Hello, Trevor," I said calmly, walking to the center of the room. "I believe this meeting's agenda includes a financial review. I have some insights that might be relevant." "Mom," he stammered, recovering slightly. "What are you doing here? You're not authorized." "Actually," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward with documents, "as 50% shareholder in Hendricks Construction. Mrs. Hendricks is fully authorized to attend all board meetings. Those documents transferring her shares were obtained through fraud and have been legally invalidated." She distributed copies of court orders to each board member while Trevor sputtered in protest. I remained silent, watching him unravel. "These are lies," he finally managed. "My mother voluntarily transferred her shares. She wanted to retire." "Is that why you drove me 50 miles into the mountains and left me on a dirt road with no phone, no transportation, and no money?" I asked, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. "Was that your idea of a retirement package?" The board members looked between us in shock. These were people who had known me for years, who had worked with Harold and me as we built the company. Their expressions shifted from confusion to horror as the truth dawned. "Mrs. Hendricks, are you saying your son abandoned you?" asked George Wilson, our longest-serving board member. "That's exactly what I'm saying, George. After tricking me into signing documents while I was grieving my husband, Trevor, drove me to a remote location and left me there telling me, and I quote, 'This is where you get off. The house and business are mine now.'" The room erupted in outraged murmurs. Trevor tried to regain control, raising his voice over the commotion. "This is ridiculous. She's clearly unstable after my father's death. These accusations are absurd." "Are they?" I nodded to Sarah, who opened her laptop and played a recording. Trevor's own voice on a call to a business associate 3 days after abandoning me, bragging about how he'd finally gotten the old lady out of the way and was free to run things properly now. His face contorted with rage. "You recorded me? That's illegal." "The person you were speaking with recorded you," Sarah corrected, "and they were quite disturbed by what they heard." For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented evidence of Trevor's mismanagement. The alienated clients, the unpaid vendors, the exodus of talented employees, the dangerously over-leveraged projects. The board listened in growing dismay as I outlined exactly how close to financial collapse the company had come under Trevor's brief leadership. Trevor's protests grew increasingly desperate and incoherent. When he realized he was losing, he tried one last desperate tactic. "You think you can walk back in here and take over," he shouted, stepping toward me with fists clenched. "After all I've done to get rid of you." His words and threatening posture silenced the room. In that moment of unguarded fury, Trevor revealed his true nature to everyone present. I stood my ground, looking him directly in the eyes. "I don't think I can take over, Trevor. I know I can. And unlike you, I know how to save this company rather than destroy it." George Wilson stood up. "I've heard enough. I move that we immediately reinstate Katherine Hendricks as CEO and remove Trevor Hendricks from all positions of authority within the company pending a full investigation of his actions." The vote was unanimous. Everyone, except Trevor, of course, who stormed out before it was completed. As the meeting adjourned, board members approached to express their shock and support. I accepted their words graciously, but felt a strange emptiness beneath my professional exterior. I had won, decisively, but at the cost of any relationship with my only child. Sarah squeezed my arm as the last board member left. "You did it, Katherine. The company is yours again." "Yes," I said quietly. "But at what price?" "The price of truth," she replied. "Some things are worth the cost." As we left the boardroom, I caught a glimpse of Trevor waiting by the elevators. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away, his face a mask of hatred and humiliation. I felt a moment of maternal grief for the son I'd lost. Not today, but long before, to greed and entitlement I'd failed to recognize. In that moment, I made a decision. Trevor had tried to destroy me, but I would not do the same to him. Justice, yes. Revenge, no. Sarah, I said, make sure the legal proceedings don't include criminal charges unless absolutely necessary. He's still my son. She looked surprised, but nodded. It's your call. What will you do now? I thought about Jackson's cabin, about the peace I'd found in simplicity, about the strength I'd discovered in myself when everything was stripped away. Now, I said, I rebuild, but differently this time. A year passed, a year of hard work, rebuilding what Trevor had nearly destroyed. Hendrick's construction stabilized under my leadership, though I approached the role differently than before. I sold the oversized house that held too many complicated memories and bought a modest cottage near the mountains. Each weekend, I drove to visit Jackson, who had become a dear friend and mentor. The woods that had once been the site of my abandonment now represented self-discovery and renewal. The company thrived with a new, more inclusive management approach. I implemented an employee stock ownership plan, gradually transferring shares to long-term employees who had invested their careers in our success. I found I enjoyed mentoring the next generation of leaders more than I'd expected. As for Trevor, our paths diverged completely. The legal consequences of his actions were significant, but not criminal. He lost his position, his reputation in the industry, and much of his inheritance, but retained enough resources to start over if he chose to. I made several attempts at reconciliation, all rebuffed. A mother's love doesn't vanish overnight, despite even the cruelest betrayal. Perhaps someday he would be ready to acknowledge what he'd done and begin healing our relationship. Until then, I had to accept the reality of his choices. The woman I'd become surprised me daily. Without Harold's steadying presence and without my identity as Trevor's mother to define me, I discovered interests and strengths I'd never known I possessed. I took painting classes, joined a hiking group, volunteered teaching business skills to women re-entering the workforce after hardship. Jackson's words often returned to me during this period of reinvention. Self-reliance is power. I'd spent decades as part of a partnership, then, briefly, as a victim of betrayal. Now, in my 60s, I was finally discovering who Katherine Hendricks truly was, independent of others' expectations or definitions. 6 months after regaining control of the company, I established the New Beginnings Foundation, providing resources for women rebuilding their lives after personal or financial betrayal. The foundation offered emergency housing, legal assistance, and business mentoring, all the things I would have needed had Jackson not appeared in my life at exactly the right moment. On the anniversary of my abandonment, I drove alone to the spot where Trevor had left me. The dirt road looked different in the light of knowledge and healing, less threatening, merely a place like any other. I stepped out of my car and stood in the exact spot where I'd watched my son drive away. The air was cool, the mountains distant and beautiful. Birds called in the trees, and somewhere nearby water bubbled over rocks. Nature, indifferent to human drama, continued its eternal cycles. Looking around at the wilderness that had once terrified me, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Trevor's betrayal meant to destroy me had instead forced me to discover strengths I never knew I possessed. In abandoning me, he had inadvertently set me free. I didn't stay long at that spot. The past holds limited value compared to the future. But before leaving, I placed a small carved mountain ash charm on a nearby rock. A reminder that sometimes what seems like an ending is merely a different beginning. The road ahead remained uncertain in many ways. Would Trevor ever seek reconciliation? Would I find companionship to ease the solitude of my later years? Would the company continue to thrive under the new ownership structure I'd created? These questions had no immediate answers, but one thing I knew with absolute certainty: I was strong enough to face whatever came next. The woman who had been abandoned on that road a year ago no longer existed. In her place stood someone wiser, more resilient, and completely her own person, perhaps for the first time in her life. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you rebuild afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes, sharing our experiences helps others know they're not alone in their struggles. If you found something valuable in my story, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and renewal. And if you know someone who might need to hear that starting over is possible at any age, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worst day might just be the beginning of your best self.